Welcome to my basic handgun safety course. My name is Bob Schneider and I am going to be your instructor for this online at-home course. It is my honor to deliver you this training today because you could have chosen from hundreds of other instructors for this class. The purpose of this training is to give you the basic skill of arms with your handgun. I'm going to give you basic handgun terminology. We're going to talk about gun handling and marksmanship skills. A little about myself. I'm a retired law enforcement officer serving as a Denver police officer for over 20 years. For 18 of those 20 years, I was assigned to our department's full-time Special Weapons and Tactics team. Yes, I was a SWAT cop. For the past 4 decades, I've been a certified firearms instructor, and I've trained thousands of people on how to handle and safely shoot their gun. Many of my students have been members of elite law enforcement and military units. I've trained Army Special Forces. I've trained Marine Force Recon. I've trained Navy SEALs. I've trained many federal, state, and local law enforcement officers. I've trained thousands of responsibly armed citizens to be safe with their guns. Don't think that this short course will make you an expert with your handgun. This course is a great introduction to your safe and proficient gun handling. But you will want to get additional training in what I call your new handgun owner lifestyle. But that being said, this online and at-home basic handgun safety course will dramatically improve your knowledge and skills with your handgun. Here's what you're going to learn today: handgun safety, ammunition basics and terminology, handgun basics and terminology, condition check, which what I call a chamber check and a magazine check, proper loading and unloading techniques, proper grip and stance, proper fundamentals of combat marksmanship, malfunctions and how to clear them, and last, I will give you some of my final thoughts, which will include proper care and cleaning of your handgun and the additional training that you'll want to take. This may seem like a lot of material, but it will only scratch the surface of the knowledge that I would love to give you. I hope that you will continue to work together so that you and your family will feel comfortable in your safe handling and your proficiency with your handgun. So let's get started with part 1, handgun safety. This is the most important aspect of your handgun training. To guarantee your safety with a handgun, you must strictly follow the 4 universal safety rules. So let's go through them and, more importantly, learn how you can apply those to your day-to-day life. Rule number 1, all guns are always loaded. So what does that mean? That means we're going to have to treat all guns as though they're always loaded. And every time we pick a gun up, we need to check to see if it's either loaded or unloaded. Even if we know the gun is unloaded, we're still going to treat it with the same respect we would as though it were loaded. Rule number 2, never let the muzzle, that's the part of the gun where the bullet comes out, cover anything you're not willing to destroy. What that means is that we have to recognize that a gun is always pointed in a direction. My gun in my holster is pointed down at the ground. When I take my gun out of my holster, put it on my nightstand, it's pointed towards the wall. My gun's in my safe. They're pointed at the back of the safe. Yes, we have to recognize that a gun is always pointed somewhere, and you have to decide what that safe direction is. So again, we're going to point our guns in a safe direction. Rule number 3, keep your finger off the trigger until your sights are on the target. So what does that mean? That means that if we're not ready to shoot, we're going to keep our finger straight alongside the gun. We're going to point our gun in a safe direction. If our sights are not on the target and we're not ready to shoot, we're going to keep our trigger finger straight alongside the gun. So that's rule number 3, keep your finger off the trigger. Rule number 4, be sure of your target. So what does that mean? That means that before you shoot a target, you need to make sure that you know what's in front of it, behind it, and what's on either side of it. At the range, that's very simple. We have our target and the impact area. That's what we're going to shoot at. But when we're on the street, if we have to shoot a bad guy, we want to make sure that we only shoot the bad guy. Do not shoot any good guys. So before you shoot a bad guy, make sure that you know what's either on either side of it, what's in front of it, or even what's on line of it. So we always have to be sure of our target. I believe if you religiously live by these 4 simple universal safety rules, you will never, ever, ever have a problem with a gun. I have had an opportunity to examine where somebody had had a negligent or accidental discharge with their gun, and I find that more than one of these 4 universal safety rules were violated. Now let's go to the next part, ammunition basics. Ammunition can be referred to as a cartridge or a round. It literally is the thing that makes the gun go bang. Here are the components of a round of ammunition. We have the bullet, the shell case. Inside the shell case is called gunpowder. And at the bottom of the case, we have the primer. So we have the primer, the gunpowder, the case, and the bullet. Here's how ammunition works. When we press the trigger, the firing pin will strike the primer, which will then send a spark into the case. The spark will ignite the gunpowder. The gunpowder will burn, which changes it from a solid to a gas. Gas pressure will begin to build and will push the bullet out of the case and move it down the barrel. The gas pressure will continue to burn, sending the bullet out of the barrel and downrange. There are several types of ammunition, but we're only going to focus on defensive handgun rounds. Ammo will come in a variety of sizes called calibers. Some examples are 9mm, 40 caliber, 10mm, 45, 38, and .357 Magnum. There are more sizes, but these seem to be the most popular ones. Some are metric and some are English. The number refers to the size of the diameter of the bullet. For example, the diameter of a 9mm bullet is 9 millimeters. The diameter of a 45 is 45/100ths of an inch in diameter. A 10 millimeter is larger than a 9, and a 40 is smaller than a 45, and so on. Now let's move on to the next part, handgun basics and terminology. I'm going to be handling some guns today in the studio, but I want you to know that I have cleared them. They are unloaded. There are literally hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 different guns that you can pick from for defensive purposes. Do not get frustrated with all the different makes and models. I am going to make this easy for you to understand. For our discussion today, there are really only 2 types of handguns, revolvers and semi-autos. Both of these designs have been around for hundreds of years, and both will work fine for our needs. However, semi-autos have become very popular today for defensive purposes. Now let's go over the parts and nomenclature of our semi-auto. There are 3 main parts of a semi-auto. They are the slide, the frame, and the magazine. Here are the parts on the slide. We have the front sight, the rear sight, and in the middle we have the ejection port. On the inside of the slide is the barrel. Now let's talk about the frame. We have the trigger guard, the trigger. Just to the right of the trigger is the magazine release. Right above that is the slide stop. Then we have the grips or the stock and the magazine well. Those are the parts of the frame. So here's a magazine. This is called a magazine, not a clip. Please call it by its correct nomenclature. It's a magazine. We'll start with the box. On the top of the box, we have the feed lips. Inside, we have the follower, the spring, and at the bottom, this is known as the floor plate. So those are the parts that make up a semi-auto. Your semi-auto may have other parts, such as safeties or maybe even decockers. Your owner's manual can help you identify these additional parts. Now let's go to a revolver. In the middle of the revolver is a cylinder. Around the cylinder is the frame, and then we have the barrel. We have the front sight and the rear sight. This gun happens to have an exposed hammer. We have the cylinder release, the trigger guard, the grips, or the stocks. So those are the parts of a revolver. In selecting a defensive handgun, I believe that you should try it before you buy it. Most ranges have a rental program where you can rent a gun, try it before you buy it. Check with your local shooting ranges, and then you'll be able to find out if they have that rental program. And lastly, I want to talk about some of the other terminology we'll be using in this class. Some of us are right-handed, and some of us are left-handed. To simplify things, I'm going to refer to our shooting side and our support side. For example, I am a right-handed shooter, so I will refer to my right side as my shooting side, and conversely, my left side as my support side. So my right hand is my shooting hand. My left elbow is my support side elbow. Now we're going to move on to the next part, condition check. This is what we call a chamber check and a magazine check. Remember back in part 1, firearm safety, we talked about the 4 universal safety rules, and specifically number 1, all guns are always loaded. I said that we would treat all guns as though they're always loaded, and we should always perform a condition check every time we pick one up. We need to find out if the gun is either loaded or unloaded. And even if we see that the gun is unloaded, we're still going to treat it with the same respect as we would as if it were loaded. So now I'm going to show you how to perform a condition check. Again, this is what we call a chamber check and a mag check. I'm going to go ahead and point my gun in a safe direction, and notice that my trigger finger is straight alongside the gun. I'm going to bring the gun up close to my chest, and with my support side hand, I'm going to come over the top, grabbing the slide with my palm and my tips of my fingers between the ejection port and the rear sight. I'm going to pull back just a little so I can see inside the ejection port, and I can see that it's unloaded. I'm going to let the slide go forward, making sure that it completely closes by pushing it forward. Now again, using my support side hand, my thumb or my index finger, I'm going to touch inside the magazine well to make sure that there's not a magazine inserted. Now with an empty ejection port and no magazine inserted, I know the gun is empty. But knowing that, I'm still going to treat it as though it were loaded. Now let's talk about doing a condition check with a revolver. Using my shooting side thumb, I'm going to push on the cylinder release. Pushing the cylinder release out, I'm going to look into each one of those chambers and I'm going to see that they're empty. I'm also going to touch each one of those to make sure that they are empty. Once I recognize that all the chambers are empty, I can go ahead and close the cylinder and rotate it until it locks into place. Now that I know that my revolver is empty, I'm still going to treat it with the same respect I would as if it were loaded. Next, I'm going to show you how to load and unload our handguns. First, I need to show you how to load a magazine. In the classroom today, I'm going to be using these bright orange training rounds. They are solid plastic and they're shaped just like a real cartridge. I'm going to grab the round with my thumb. I'm going to push down on the magazine follower and push the base of the round underneath the feed lips and push it into the magazine. I'll continue using the same technique until the magazine is full, and then I'll tap the back of the magazine to ensure that the rounds are seated in the back of the magazine. Then to load my semi-auto, I'll start by pointing my gun in a safe direction. This direction today is our safe direction in our classroom. Notice my trigger finger is straight alongside the gun. I need to start by doing a condition check. Chamber check, mag check. I know that my gun is unloaded, but now I want to load it. I'm going to take a magazine, insert it into the bottom of the magazine wheel, give it a good smack. Don't baby it. I'm going to grab the top of the slide with the palm of my support side hand and the tips of my fingers of my support side hand. I'm going to push with my shooting side hand, pull with my support side hand, which will load a round from the magazine into the chamber. Now I'll finish up by doing a chamber check. Yep, there's a round in my chamber. Check with a magazine check. Yep, ammunition in my magazine. Reinsert it, give it a little tug to make sure that it's inserted. Now my gun is loaded. Now to unload, I'll start with a chamber check and a magazine check. I'll see that there's a round in the chamber and I know the gun is loaded. I'll go ahead and push the magazine release button, dropping the magazine into my hand, and I'll put that magazine in my pocket. Then I'll use my support side hand and grab the back of the slide just like I've done before, and I'll push the gun forward and the slide to the back, allowing the round to go on the ground. I'll finish up the unload with a chamber check and a magazine check. Now my gun is unloaded, but I'll still treat it as if it were loaded. Loading and unloading a revolver. Again, it starts with a condition check. However, the revolver does not have a magazine. We only need to check the chambers in the cylinder. With the gun pointed in a safe direction and my finger straight alongside the gun, I'll push the cylinder release, allowing the cylinder to come out of the frame. I look and feel to confirm the condition of the gun. I see that the revolver is empty. I then tip the muzzle down and push in a round of ammunition into each chamber. The round will go into the chamber bullet end first. After all the chambers are filled, I'll visually and physically check to make sure and I know that my gun is loaded. I now close the cylinder back into the frame, rotating the cylinder until it locks into place. Now my revolver is loaded. To unload, I point the gun in a safe direction. Again, I put my trigger finger straight alongside the gun. I push the cylinder release, allowing the cylinder to drop out of the frame. I'll tip the muzzle up, allowing the rounds to fall out of the cylinder. I'll push the ejector rod to assist any rounds that may be stuck in the cylinder. I finish up by visually and physically inspecting, checking each chamber to ensure the gun is unloaded. I push the cylinder back into the frame, rotating it until it locks into place. Now that I've shown you how to load and unload, let's move on to the next part, where I'll show you grip and stance. I'm going to show you how to hold your gun and how you want to position your body to fire the gun. The purpose of this is to give you the proper grip and stance so you'll be able to control the gun when you fire it. The proper grip starts with the web of my hand, the area between my thumb and my index finger, and I'll come up as high as I can on the back strap of the gun. My trigger finger is straight. My middle finger comes up as high as it can underneath the trigger guard. My other two fingers just wrap around with it. My thumb is straight and high in the sky. Now let's talk about my support side hand. I'm going to take my palm of my support side hand and I'm going to put it up against the gun. My index finger and my other fingers just wrap around the frame. My thumb on my support side is going to lay on the side of the gun. My shooting side thumb can rest on top of my support side thumb. My thumbs are relaxed. This is the proper two-handed grip. Now let's move to the proper shooting stance. The proper combat shooting stance starts with the bottom of my feet and goes to the top of my head. My feet are about shoulders width apart. I have equal amount of weight on my feet. I am balanced. My shooting side foot is back just a little bit. I have a little bit of flex in my knees. My hips and shoulders are facing the target. My head is straight and erect in the sky. I lean forward to bring my weight over the balls of my feet. Now with my gun in the proper two-hand grip, I extend my arms to bring the gun up to eye level. I bring the gun up to eye level. I don't bring my head down to the gun. To add power in my grip, I push with my shooting side arm and I pull with my support side arm, creating even a tighter grip on my gun. This extra power in your hands will help you to control the recoil of your gun. So I'm pushing and pulling and pressing my palms together. The grip is very tight. Now that I've shown you proper grip and stance, let's move on to the rest of the fundamentals of combat shooting. Up to this point, I've been showing you proper gun handling. Now let's switch to combat marksmanship. There can be several fundamentals of shooting depending on how accurate you need to make your shot. A sniper will want to control his breathing and his heartbeat. We are going to concentrate our efforts on hitting a target very quickly that may not be very far away. It may only be one arm's length away. So we're going to concentrate on hitting the target very quickly with accurate shots. We're going to balance speed and accuracy. Now don't get me wrong, we still need to breathe and our heart still needs to beat. But those things are not as critical because we are very close to our target and we have a very large target to hit. So now what we're going to talk about are sight alignment, sight picture, and trigger control. Let me explain each one of those to you. First, sight alignment. Sight alignment is defined as the front sight in the notch of the rear sight. Both sights have equal height, and there's an equal amount of light on both sides of the front sight. Equal height, equal light. Now sight picture. Sight picture is defined as taking those aligned sights and putting them on our target. And now we're going to talk about trigger control. Of the three, this is the most difficult one to master. Let's start with where you place your finger on the trigger. Look at your trigger finger and find your fingerprint. That's where we'll start. Place your fingerprint on the face of the trigger. If you find that you do not have enough strength to press the trigger, from that point, you may move your trigger finger further into the trigger guard until your first knuckle is on the face of the trigger. To start your trigger control, we'll touch the trigger. You'll want to take out the slack of the trigger. Let me demonstrate this. Now that you have reached the point where the trigger will stop, then you will continue to increase the pressure on your trigger until the gun fires. This is known as the break point. The key to accurate firing your gun is to do not disturb the sights as the gun fires. My advice is that you let the gun go off, do not make it go off. After the gun fires, I want you to hold the trigger to the rear. I do not want you to jump off the trigger. Now relax your trigger finger, allowing the trigger to move forward until you can feel and hear a mechanical click or clunk. We have now reached the reset point. At the reset point, you can simply start the trigger press again if you want to do any follow-up shots. You may have to take up a little bit of slack on the trigger, depends on your gun. It's important to mention again now that you want to have a hard focus on the front sight. With the slack out of the trigger and the focus back on the front sight, verifying that your sights are on the target, we call this follow-through. If you want to fire your gun again, now all you'll need to do is to increase the pressure on the trigger to let it fire. Don't make it fire. If you do that, you will probably move the gun off the target and you will miss. Continue to press, hold, reset, sight picture, press until you're done shooting. The keys to accurately shooting your handgun are a proper grip, seeing the front sight, and controlling the trigger. Proper grip is very firm. I want you to push-pull, press your palms up against the frame of the gun. Hard focus on the front sight and see that front sight on your target. Trigger control, again, is the most difficult fundamental to master. Touch the trigger, take the slack out, increase the pressure, letting the gun fire. Relax your trigger finger until the trigger resets. Do all three of those again if you need to do a follow-up shot. Now let's move on to the next part called malfunctions. In this part, I will show you how to keep your gun running just in case you experience a stoppage. We generally have two types of stoppages. We call them jams or malfunctions. A jam is described as a stoppage that we cannot fix quickly on the street. It will require us to take our gun to a gunsmith or an armorer to get it fixed. They might need to use tools, and it'll spend some time to get it fixed. A malfunction is described as a stoppage that we can clear very quickly on the street. While shooting is a conscious act, clearing a malfunction is a trained response that we need to do very quickly, spontaneously, if we're in a gunfight. Malfunctions are divided into three different types, simply called Type 1, Type 2, or Type 3. All three of these need to be looked at as a symptom and a solution. I should not be concerned about with why it happened, only the fact that it did happen and how to fix it. Trying to figure out why it happened will only slow you down on fixing it. This is time wasted, which is better spent on fixing the problem. To demonstrate clearing each of these malfunctions today, I'm going to be using my orange training rounds. So let's get started with Type 1, known as a failure to fire. The gun goes click when you expected it to go bang. What causes this? Maybe your gun is empty. You don't have a round in the chamber. This is the number one reason, in my opinion, why we have this malfunction. Or maybe you have a bad round of ammunition loaded into the chamber. This is why we only shoot good quality ammunition. Or we might have a spent case loaded in the chamber. To set up a Type 1 malfunction, I'm going to unload my gun. I'm now going to insert a magazine loaded with my training rounds. I'm going to perform a final chamber check to ensure that my gun is unloaded. To clear a Type 1 malfunction, I'm going to start with the gun pointed at the target. I'm going to press the trigger and I'm going to get a click. I expected a bang. That click is the symptom. The solution is I'm going to keep my gun pointed on the target. My trigger finger goes straight alongside the gun, and I use the palm of my support side hand to smack the bottom of the magazine to ensure that it's seated. I'm now going to move my hand to an overhand grip, just like I did when I was loading my gun. Then I'm going to rack the slide and roll the gun to the right, using gravity to help remove anything from the ejection port and letting the slide strip the round off the top of the magazine and putting it into the chamber. Then I'm going to establish a proper two-hand grip and getting back into action. This means that you may or may not need to fire. Your decision, remember, is your decision to shoot. This is a conscious decision. Clearing the malfunction is an immediate trained response. Now let's talk about a type 2 malfunction. This is known as a failure to eject, stovepipe, or high brass. This can be caused because our shooter limp-wristed the gun as it went bang. The shooter did not have a firm grip on the gun, and it could not perform its correct ejecting and loading a new round into the chamber. The slide started to the rear, but now it has trapped the spent case into the ejection port. This is why we need to have a firm grip on the gun as it fires. Now let's set it up. It starts with me unloading my gun. I'm going to lock the slide to the rear. I'm going to pull the slide back, and at the same time I'm going to push up on the slide stop so that I lock the slide to the rear. Now I'm going to take my dummy round, I'm going to hold it into the ejection port, and I'm going to ease the slide forward, trapping the round into the ejection port. Then I'm going to insert a loaded magazine of my dummy rounds into the mag well, and this is what it looks like. The symptom of this is when I'm pointing on target, you will not be able to see your front sight. You're going to see the piece of brass sticking in the way. The solution to fix this is exactly the same way we did to fix a type 1. Keep the gun on target. Take your trigger finger, make sure it's straight alongside the frame. I'm going to tap the bottom of the magazine. I'm going to rack and roll the gun to the right, allowing gravity to remove anything that's in the slide. And now the slide will come forward, moving a new round out of the magazine and putting it into the chamber. Return the gun back on target with a proper two-hand grip. Fire only if you need to. Again, shooting is a conscious decision. Fixing the problem is an immediate trained response. Now let's finish with the type 3 malfunction. It's known as a failure to extract, a double feed, or brass low. It can be caused by the spent case not being extracted out of the chamber, and the slide comes all the way to the rear, stripping around off the top of the magazine and pushing it into the chamber, trying to get it in the chamber. But it can't go in the chamber because there's already something there. Again, we don't care why this happened, only the symptom and the solution. When you experience any stoppage with your gun, I want you to immediately try to fix it with a tap, rack, and roll. In my experience, that fixes almost all your stoppages. Plus, you can do it very quickly. But if that does not fix the problem, then we'll have to do something else. So now let me set one up. To start with, I want to make sure that my gun is unloaded. Lock the slide to the rear. Point the muzzle down at the ground. I'm now going to take one of my training rounds and drop it into the chamber. Take a magazine loaded with my training rounds. I'm going to insert it into the bottom of the gun, into the mag well. Ease the slide forward. Now we have a type 3 malfunction. This is what it looks like. Notice the round in the chamber and the round from the top of the magazine is trying to go into the chamber, but we have a whole lot of brass low. To clear this, I'm going to start with the gun pointed at the target. I then press the trigger and notice nothing happens. I keep the gun on target. My trigger finger goes straight. I'm going to start with a tap, rack, and roll. This did not fix the gun. So this is the symptom. Now for the solution. Because this may take me a little bit longer to clear, I might want a seat cover and concealment. I will then want to lock the slide to the rear. Then I want to strip the magazine from the gun, but don't throw the magazine on the ground. I'm going to retain it by putting it behind my little finger, my shooting side hand, or underneath my armpit. I want to keep the magazine because it may be the only one I have, or it may be my last one. so I want to keep it. Then with my overhand grip, I'm going to rack 3 times to clear anything out of the chamber. I'll then reinsert my magazine. I'll need to rack the slide again to load a round from the magazine into the chamber. And then I'm going to return to action with a proper 2-hand grip. This means that you may or may not need to fire. Remember, your decision to shoot is a conscious decision. Clearing a malfunction is an immediate trained response. Now we're going to talk about my final thoughts. I'm going to talk to you about how to care and clean your gun, and I'm going to talk to you about what to do next. Let's start by talking about the tools we're going to use to clean your gun. We have a rag, gun oil, toothbrush, and a bore snake. Now we're going to start to clean our gun. We need to make sure that there's no ammunition in the cleaning area. Next, I want to make sure that I have my gun unloaded. I'm going to visually and physically inspect to make sure that it's empty. Now that I know that my gun is empty, I can start to disassemble it. If you don't know how to disassemble your gun, just check with your owner's manual, or I'm sure there's a YouTube video on how to do it. Now my gun is disassembled, I'm going to go ahead and start to clean the barrel. I'm going to take my bore snake with the brass end, I'm going to drop it into the barrel from the chamber end and run the whole thing through. I want to do that maybe 4 or 5 times. Once the inside of the barrel is clean, I can take my rag and wipe off my feed ramp and my muzzle, and I can also wipe the outside of the barrel. Next, I'll take the slide and my toothbrush and scrub the inside, loosening any debris. I'll then take my rag and wipe out that loosened debris. Next, I'll take the frame, again using my toothbrush, loosening the debris, and then taking my rag and wiping that debris off. I can also take my rag and just wipe off the outside of my magazine. Now that my gun is clean, I'll go ahead and lube it. With my lube, I want to put a small drop on each of the rails of the frame. I'll also want to put a small drop on the rails on the slide, and a small drop on my barrel and the hood. I'll then take my finger and wipe that. Now that I have it properly lubed, I'll go ahead and reassemble it. I'll take my slide, drop the barrel in, the recoil guide rod, take the slide and fit it onto the frame, and then run my slide a couple times. I can then use my rag to wipe off any excess oil or liquid that I have on my gun. Now my gun is cleaned. Now I'm going to talk to you about what to do next. You're going to take a short test to demonstrate your new handgun safety knowledge. Thanks for watching the class. Just follow the instructions to be able to download your certificate at the end. If you want to get any more information about my training classes, please follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks again for watching the class, and stay safe.